You want to make sure at this point that all your pieces are flexed to as flat as you can get them. So if there's sort of you won't have a hump this way, hopefully, if you've got nice flat toothpicks, but there might be a sort of a bend here, which you might want to flatten out. And any of these front plate pieces, if they're flexed at all, just work that out. Also keep in mind, or keep an extra eye out for these parts that aren't supported by a toothpick. You may have to bend those a little bit back into position. The other thing you want to kind of do is pre-flex all these past or beyond the point where you're actually going to have them sitting, because then they will sit easily in the position they're supposed to occupy. So just bend these all over as close to 90 degrees as you feel comfortable doing. You can see how it's kind of almost sitting in the shape it needs to. It won't take much pressure from the patches to hold it there. And these parts fit together nice and snug, which is good. That you can tell neither of them are bowed or flexed. These wings are very important also to bend over, so flex these pieces back into normal position before you flex these ones out, or you'll end up bending your wings here, which again you want to make sure are nice and straight. So overflex these to at least 90 degrees, I would say. Any more than that, you'll start risking some tears and disruptions of your basic shape. But if you get them to 90 degrees, they'll just sit kind of where they're supposed to be usually. And so flex those back out of your way for making this first connection. And as a general rule, when you're patching stuff together, cover patches here for a second. I'm using 4-to-1 glue for this. I'm going to use 4 glue, 1 water. I'm going to use very thin quantities of it so that the patches dry in place nearly instantaneously. I've got one started over here, but it's not really necessary, especially if you're doing more than one vehicle. You can just do this patch on this one, do the patch on another one, then come right back to the next one and it'll be dry. You can even proceed without waiting. It's a little bit riskier, but it's fine. They really dry pretty much right away, especially if you use not much glue, which you don't want to use much glue at all. They bond really good. The patches, I've pre-cut a whole bunch of them, various shapes, some small ones, some long ones. We don't need those now, but we will need them for a future step. I believe the next step for the chassis, anyways. So we've got some larger ones, larger squares, and some smaller pieces. That's what we're going to use right now. So once you're ready, you want to, like again, I flex these out of the way so they're not banging against these side wings. And you're trying to meet these up basically inside corner of cardboard to inside corner of cardboard. That's where you'll get your tightest bond. And especially with this one, it's the biggest challenge to make a really tight, firm bond here. Don't be afraid to use more than one patch. If your patches, or if your bond is like tight on one side and loose on the other, then rather than removing the one good patch, just tighten it up on the other side and then repatch, paying attention to the side that's looser. And you'll see what I mean by trial and error, especially if you don't get it right the first time. You'll see how it goes. And I may not get it right the first time, and in that case I'll show you the further patch method. So just try to meet them up on inside corner to inside corner. I know the cardboard's thin, it's not easy, but once you kind of have them in place, then lock them together with your thumb and forefinger there. You probably just want to go ahead. Now these are strategically cut so that they are not going to get in the way of my fingers when I put this down. And I'm just going to go ahead and put glue on both surfaces. Oh, this is a little hard. All my yapping has hardened my paintbrush a little bit. Okay, so put a bit of glue over here, and I'll go ahead and put glue over here. Now, one thing you might want to do to promote extra bonding is try to get a little bit of glue in the space between them, so the cardboard actually bonds right together rather than it just being a patch bond. That can help a little bit. Another thing you're going to want to do if you've done these tow hook holes is have the patch go right over them, so that any further glue that goes down on the chassis doesn't get into those holes, because it's really hard to insert the tow hooks if those holes are covered in glue many times. So just make sure everything's attaching nice and smartly, and then put a little bit of pressure while you're folding it over so that you get a nice tight bond, and hopefully everything's lined up nicely. Now, if you have any real variation in this, so you want these to meet pretty much flush. This is close enough that I'm satisfied, and it's a nice tight bond here, so I'm going to leave it. But you want to make especially sure when you're holding it with your thumb and forefinger that everything's lined up. This is a nice tight bond. So I'm going to let that dry for a minute, and I'll show you on this one how to proceed next. So now you kind of can see that the chassis starts to take shape. If again you set these angles up so that the inside corner meets inside corner, the rest of your angles will be forced into place. So just overbend these a little bit, and then you're going to make a bond inside corner to inside corner. And you can choose any one of them to start at. I'm just choosing this front corner from habit, I guess. And again, it's not a bad idea to actually put some glue in here. You don't want to try to bond it with just that. You'll be holding it for a very long time under those conditions. But it's not a bad idea to assist the bond that way. But you want to reserve the right to back out at any time if you feel awkward or that you've lost your position. And one of the things you want to make sure you're doing is to keep your fingers out of the way of where you want to put the patch. So often you want to hold it really close to where you're going to put the patch in order to maintain stability. But then your fingers are in the way and you kind of have to let it go to put the patch on. And then you'll lose the nice, beautiful angles that you're maintaining through finger steadiness. So as you can see, I can just let that go right away, and the patch will hold it. These tracing paper patches are much better than the material I used to use. And they're totally see-through, so the detailing, if you cover it at all, you can still see it through them fine, which is an advantage as well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw some glue in between these bits. And I'll find my mark. You'll also find once you have one side glued, the other side's a little bit easier to do because the chassis is starting to hold its natural shape on its own, and you don't have to do as much fiddling with it. You still have to do some, but it's less once you have one side done. Now you can see that this front part is coming out a little further than this side part is connecting to it. If that happens greatly, you can trim that down a little bit or readjust how your angles meet. But that generally means that you've just cut this wrong. Or this angle is offset, or something is odd and off. So it should be meeting pretty much flush. You might end up trimming just a little bit off there before you put in the, not the next piece, but the piece after that. But don't worry about it too much. If it's a little bit not exactly on the same level. Same with the back. It should be really close, but it may not be perfect. You can modify those small inconsistencies later. So quite often I'll cut these patches too long, and so they'll be a little bit overhanging on the edges here. I'm just going to trim that off after everything's dry and set. It's not a big deal. I choose to put my overhangs to the bottom, but you can overhang to the top and just trim it off as well. It's not important which side you choose. All right.